The Iron Psalm of Perdition, a 40K story. By David Hall. March 3, 2025. Chapter List. The Rustweave Descent. Clockwork Martyrs Stir. Gears of Carnage Turn. The Steam-Forged Agony. Echoes in the Spine Grinder. The Blood Boiler's Embrace. The Cogsmith's Iron Requiem. Entropy's Unending Hymn. Summary. In the grimy, soot-choked realm of a steampunk-infused Warhammer 40K, a hardened squad of Imperial Guardsmen are dispatched to the desolate factory world of Xylos, tasked with a seemingly routine salvage operation. However, they soon discover the world is far from abandoned, finding themselves trapped within a nightmarish industrial complex teeming with grotesque, clockwork-augmented abominations and the lingering evidence of unspeakable heretical experiments. As they navigate the labyrinthine machinery, they are relentlessly pursued by bloodthirsty automatons, each encounter a descent further into terror. The guardsmen must uncover the horrifying truth behind the factory's Iron Psalm, a symphony of suffering orchestrated by a mad genius, a truth that threatens to shatter their sanity and condemn their souls to eternal torment. Chapter 1, The Rustweave Descent. The void ship Ironclad Resolve shuddered violently as it pierced the diseased atmosphere of Xylos, its aged hull groaning under the immense pressure. Inside the cramped transport bay, Sergeant Valerius, a veteran of countless brutal campaigns, gripped his lasgun with a familiar, almost comforting weight. His gaze was fixed on the viewport, where the horrifying vista of Xylos unfolded like a nightmare made manifest. Colossal factory spires, twisted and corroded, clawed at a sky the color of dried blood. Gargantuan gears, monuments to a forgotten industry, lay scattered across the landscape, choked with rust and the skeletal remains of machinery that had long since ceased to function. An unnatural stillness permeated the air, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight, far more unsettling than the chaotic din of any battlefield he had ever known. Atmospheric integrity nominal, Sergeant, reported Guardsman Anya, her voice betraying a tremor despite her attempts at professionalism. Her youthful face was pale, reflecting the oppressive gloom outside. Vox scans are disturbing. Fragmented signals, echoes of screams, nothing coherent. Valerius grunted, his weathered face grim. The Mechanicus's sanitized reports painted a far less evocative picture. A dormant industrial world ripe for reclamation, they said. He didn't trust the cold logic of the machine cult for a moment. There was a palpable sense of dread clinging to this world, a tangible aura of suffering. The transport ramp hissed open, revealing a landscape of jagged metal and deep, ominous shadows. A biting wind, thick with the stench of burnt oil, decay, and something else, a faint, metallic sweetness that prickled the nostrils, whipped through the bay. Before them loomed the immense, gaping maw of the primary factory complex, its rusted gates hanging askew, resembling the broken teeth of some colossal, predatory beast. Standard fire team insertion, Valerius commanded, his voice low and gravelly, cutting through the oppressive silence. Anya, maintain Vox surveillance, focus on any discernible life signs, no matter how faint. Markov, heavy weapons cover, secure our egress point. Karas, you're with me on point. They moved with practiced caution, their boots crunching on the loose debris that carpeted the ground. The interior of the factory was a cavernous abyss, swallowed by an impenetrable darkness. Weak shafts of corrupted sunlight pierced through shattered skylights high above, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and danced with the swirling dust motes, playing tricks on the eye. The air grew heavier, the cloying scent of dried blood intensifying, mingling with the pervasive metallic tang. A sudden, chilling scraping sound echoed from the depths of the factory, slicing through the oppressive silence. It was the sound of metal grinding against metal, a rhythmic, unsettling rasp that sent a shiver down Valerius's spine. "Did you hear that, Sergeant?" Karas whispered, his hand instinctively tightening around the grip of his last pistol. His usually jovial face was etched with unease. Valerius nodded grimly, his senses on high alert. Something is definitely active within these walls. Something unnatural. They advanced deeper into the gloom, their las guns held at the ready, their beams cutting through the darkness. The scraping grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural grinding that vibrated through the metal floor beneath their feet. Rounding a massive, corroded support pillar, they were confronted by a scene that would forever be etched into their nightmares. A figure, vaguely humanoid in form but brutally twisted and augmented, was hunched over a mangled corpse. Its limbs were a chaotic and horrifying amalgamation of rusted gears, hissing pistons, and razor-sharp metal plates. Its head was a crudely fashioned cogwheel, and where eyes should have been, twin beams of malevolent crimson light pulsed with an unholy energy. Its mechanical limbs tore at the remains of the corpse with sickening efficiency, scattering gore across the rusted metal floor. The thing on the ground had once been human, likely a previous salvage crew member or some other unfortunate soul. Now, it was a shredded mess of flesh and bone, its lifeblood staining the metal a deeper, more viscous crimson. The clockwork horror lifted its cogwheel head, its crimson lights fixing on the guardsmen. A high-pitched, whirring sound, like a tortured machine spirit, emanated from its metallic throat. By the Emperor's sacred name. Markov breathed, his usually stoic face paling visibly. The sight was beyond anything they had encountered in their years of service. Before anyone could react, the clockwork creature lunged with terrifying speed, its blade limbs whirling in a deadly arc. Valerius roared a warning, unleashing a volley of lost fire. The crimson beam struck the automaton, tearing chunks from its metallic body, showering sparks and oily fluids, but it barely faltered. It moved with an unnatural, jerky swiftness that defied its crude construction. Karas screamed as one of the creature's razor-sharp appendages slashed across his chest, tearing through his flak armor and gouging deep into his flesh. Blood erupted in a crimson spray, staining the already blood-soaked metal floor. Valerius fired again and again, driving the creature back with sustained bursts, but more of them were emerging from the shadows, their crimson eyes glowing with predatory hunger in the gloom. The seemingly routine salvage operation had devolved into a desperate, blood-soaked struggle for survival against a mechanical nightmare born of madness and heresy. Chapter 2, Clockwork Martyrs Stir. The vast factory floor transformed into a gruesome tableau of carnage in a matter of moments. More of the clockwork horrors materialized from the oppressive shadows, their metallic limbs clicking and whirring with increasing urgency and menace. They moved with a disturbing, disjointed gait, their crimson eyes burning with a cold, relentless hunger that spoke of something far beyond mere programming. Markov, his heavy bolter roaring like an enraged beast, unleashed a devastating barrage of explosive rounds into the advancing ranks of the automatons. Metallic bodies erupted in showers of sparks, twisted metal fragments, and viscous black oil. Limbs were torn away, and cogwheels spun uselessly on the blood-slicked floor. But for every automaton that fell in a mangled heap, two more seemed to lurch forward from the deeper recesses of the factory, their mechanical hunger insatiable. Anya screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pure terror, as one of the creatures, its face a grotesque mask of grinding gears and exposed wires, lunged at her with surprising agility. Valerius reacted instantly, firing a concentrated burst of lost fire that vaporized its head in a shower of sparks and molten metal. But another automaton was already upon him, its blade arm aimed with chilling precision at his throat. He parried the blow with his lasgun, the impact jarring his arm painfully, and followed up with a brutal kick that sent the creature staggering back, its metallic body clanging against a rusted support beam. Karas lay bleeding profusely on the cold metal floor, his lifeblood forming a dark, spreading pool around him. Valerius knew they couldn't hold their ground here. They were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched by these relentless, unfeeling machines. "Fall back," he bellowed, his voice raw with urgency. "Regroup at the landing bay. Now." They retreated through the labyrinthine corridors of the factory, the clockwork horrors relentlessly pursuing them, their mechanical footfalls echoing ominously in the confined spaces. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt promethium, the metallic tang of blood, and the incessant clicking and grinding of their pursuers. They stumbled into a vast, dimly lit chamber filled with row upon row of half-completed automatons. Their metallic bodies lay inert on rusted assembly lines, limbs and gears scattered around them like discarded toys. But as the guardsmen moved cautiously through the silent chamber, the dormant machines began to stir. Gears whirred to life, pistons hissed with escaping steam, and crimson lights flickered on in their vacant eye sockets. The clockwork cadavers were awakening. A wave of icy dread washed over the guardsmen. They were trapped in a mechanical necropolis, surrounded by legions of newly animated monstrosities. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows alive with the ominous clicking and grinding of their relentless pursuers. Markov, his face a mask of grim determination, heft his heavy bolter. "Hold the line. For the Emperor," he bellowed, unleashing a thunderous torrent of explosive rounds into the advancing ranks of the awakened automatons. The chamber echoed with the deafening roar of the weapon and the sickening crunch of metal being torn apart. Valerius knew their chances were dwindling rapidly. They were just a handful of battle-weary guardsmen against an army of relentless, unfeeling machines animated by some dark, unholy power. But they were soldiers of the Imperium, and they would sell their lives dearly. They would fight until their last breath echoed in the iron halls of this mechanical hell. Chapter 3, Gears of Carnage Turn. The Chamber of Awakening became a scene of utter pandemonium, a mechanical charnel house where the air vibrated with the roar of Markov's heavy bolter and the sickening sounds of metal tearing flesh. The newly animated automatons surged forward, an inexorable tide of grinding gears and flashing blades, their crimson eyes burning with a cold, unwavering purpose. Anya, her lasgun spitting continuous beams of crimson light, fought with desperate ferocity, each shot felling another of the mechanical horrors. But one of the creatures, its body a grotesque amalgamation of sharpened gears and whirring mechanisms, lunged at her with surprising speed. Its metallic claws, like the talons of some infernal bird, tore through her flak armor as if it were paper. She screamed, a raw, agonizing sound, as the gears bit into her flesh, grinding bone and sinew with horrifying efficiency. Valerius watched in helpless horror as she collapsed, her body a mangled ruin amidst the churning metal. A primal rage surged through him, eclipsing his fear. He unleashed a sustained and furious barrage of lost fire at the creature that had butchered Anya, blasting it into a shower of sparks and twisted, molten metal. But there was no time for grief, no time to mourn. More of the clockwork horrors were relentlessly closing in, their mechanical footfalls echoing ominously on the metal floor. Karas, despite the grievous wound tearing through his chest, propped himself precariously against a fallen automaton, his last pistol barking defiance, providing what little covering fire he could muster. But his strength was visibly ebbing, his face ashen and slick with cold sweat. Valerius and Markov fought back to back, a desperate island of humanity amidst a sea of relentless metal. Their weapons blazed, carving temporary paths through the advancing automatons. But the machines were relentless, their attacks coordinated and brutally efficient. One of them, larger and more heavily armored than the others, its limbs ending in massive crushing claws capable of rending steel, lumbered towards them, an iron behemoth amidst its lesser brethren. "That one's different," Markov grunted, his face strained with effort as he directed a sustained volley of heavy bolter rounds at the advancing giant. The explosive rounds slammed into its thick armor plating, leaving scorched marks and gouges, but the creature barely faltered, its crimson eyes fixed on them with unwavering intent. It swung one of its massive claws, a sweeping arc of brutal force that caught Markov squarely across the chest. The impact shattered his armor with a sickening crunch and sent him flying backwards, his body slamming against the cold metal floor with a dull thud. Valerius saw the light extinguish in his eyes, the heavy bolter clattering uselessly beside his outstretched hand. He was alone now, facing the monstrous automaton, the last bastion of humanity in this mechanical hell. Despair, cold and suffocating, threatened to engulf him, but he fought it back with a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. He would not break. He would not yield. He would fight until his last breath rattled in his throat. He charged towards the behemoth, his lasgun firing on full auto, the crimson beams hammering against its armored hide. The creature roared, a grating, mechanical shriek of fury, and continued its inexorable advance, its crushing claws reaching for him. He dodged its clumsy swipe, rolling under its massive frame, and fired a point-blank shot into the exposed joints of its legs. The behemoth shrieked again, a higher-pitched, more distressed sound this time, and staggered back, its mechanical limbs momentarily faltering. Valeria seized the fleeting opportunity, scrambling to his feet and unleashing another volley of loss fire into its head, targeting the glowing crimson lenses. The lights flickered violently and died, and the massive automaton crashed to the ground with a deafening clang that echoed through the ravaged chamber. But the brief respite was shattered as more of the clockwork horrors closed in, their crimson eyes fixed on him with unwavering malice. He was surrounded, utterly alone, and the telltale click of his lasgun indicated his ammunition was dangerously low. The gears of this infernal factory seemed to be grinding not just metal, but his very bones and spirit to dust. Chapter 4, The Steam-Forged Agony. Valerius fought with the primal ferocity of a cornered beast, his movements a desperate dance of survival amidst the relentless onslaught of the automatons. His lasgun barked its last few crimson breaths, each shot felling another of the mechanical horrors, but their numbers seemed inexhaustible, an unending tide of metal and malice. The air hung heavy with the acrid smell of burnt metal, the sharp tang of ozone, and the ever-present, cloying sweetness of blood and oil. He used the fallen, sparking husks of the automatons as meager cover, moving through the chamber like a phantom, firing his dwindling shots whenever a fleeting opportunity presented itself. But his energy was rapidly draining, his movements growing sluggish and heavy. The constant strain of combat, coupled with the grief of losing his squad, was taking its toll. He stumbled through a shattered doorway and found himself in a vast engine room, a cacophony of hissing steam and the deafening roar of colossal, churning machinery assaulting his senses. A tangled network of pipes snaked across the walls and ceiling, hissing and spitting scalding vapor with unpredictable ferocity. The heat was intense, radiating from the massive boilers and intricate systems, making his already damaged armor feel like a torturous furnace. Here, the automatons were different, more formidable and imposing. They were larger, more heavily armored, their movements powered by hissing steam cylinders and complex networks of gleaming pipes. Jets of superheated steam erupted from their joints with each movement, creating blinding clouds of vapor and adding another layer of lethal hazard to the already treacherous environment. Their movements were more deliberate, more powerful, each step shaking the metal floor with a resounding clang. One of these steam-powered behemoths, its body a towering mass of blackened iron and hissing brass, lumbered towards him, its massive fists clad in reinforced metal plates capable of crushing bone and tearing through steel. Jets of superheated steam billowed around it, creating a blinding, scalding haze. Valerius knew he couldn't engage this monstrosity in direct combat. He was outmatched in terms of firepower and sheer brute strength. He needed to exploit the environment, to turn the very hazards of this steam-choked chamber to his advantage. He dove behind a massive, hissing steam pipe just as the automaton swung its massive fist, the impact shaking the entire room and sending a shower of sparks and scalding droplets raining down. He scrambled along the network of pipes, the searing heat radiating from their surfaces burning his skin through his damaged armor. The steam-powered automaton followed, its heavy, rhythmic footsteps shaking the metal floor, its crimson eyes glowing like malevolent embers through the swirling steam. He reached a critical junction of several large pipes, pressure gauges spinning wildly, safety valves hissing ominously. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he unleashed the last few shots from his lasgun at the main pressure valve of the largest pipe. The aged metal groaned under the strain, and with a deafening shriek that drowned out the roar of the other machinery, the valve burst, unleashing a catastrophic torrent of superheated steam. The engine room was instantly engulfed in a blinding, scalding cloud of vapor. Valerius shielded his face with his arm, his scorched armor offering only meager protection against the intense heat. He could hear the agonizing metallic screams of the steam-powered automaton as the superheated steam ripped through its intricate mechanical body, tearing apart pipes and melting vital components. When the searing steam finally cleared, the towering automaton lay in pieces on the floor, its once imposing form now a mangled ruin of scorched and twisted metal. But the engine room had become a death trap, filled with lingering clouds of scalding steam and the oppressive, suffocating heat of the still raging machinery. He had survived the steam-forged agony, but he knew he couldn't linger. He had to find a way out of this mechanical inferno. Chapter 5, Echoes in the Spine Grinder. Valerius staggered out of the ruined engine room, his body screaming in protest, his armor scorched, dented, and offering little real protection. He found himself in a narrow corridor, the walls lined with a terrifying array of intricate cogwheels and whirring gears of all sizes, intermeshing and turning with a relentless, hypnotic motion. The air vibrated with an incessant mechanical symphony, a maddening chorus of high-pitched clicks, low grinding sounds, and the constant whirring of unseen mechanisms. The corridor twisted and turned with no discernible pattern, leading deeper and deeper into the cold, metallic heart of the factory. The walls seemed to press in on him, the mechanical cacophony growing louder with each step, a suffocating wave of noise that threatened to shatter his already frayed sanity. He felt like he was being swallowed alive by some colossal, mechanical beast, its inner workings a constant, grating reminder of his precarious situation. More of the smaller, faster automatons, their movements jerky and unsettling, materialized from the deep shadows that clung to the edges of the corridor. Their crimson eyes, burning with a cold, predatory intelligence, fixed on him, and they advanced with a silent, purposeful menace. Their blade limbs, sharp and wickedly designed, flashed in the dim, flickering light. Valerius fought them off with grim determination, his movements becoming more and more desperate as his strength waned. He was running critically low on ammunition for his last pistol, each shot a precious resource, and his battered body screamed in protest with every swing of his improvised weapon, a heavy piece of twisted metal he had scavenged from the engine room wreckage. He stumbled through another doorway and found himself in a vast, echoing chamber, a dizzying labyrinth of interconnected cogwheels, massive gears that dwarfed even the largest he had seen before, and treacherous moving platforms that shifted and rotated with unpredictable speed. The floor seemed to undulate beneath his feet, making it difficult to maintain his balance in the dim, oil-slicked light. The air was thick with the pungent smell of industrial lubricants and the ever-present, sickly sweet metallic scent of dried blood. Here, the automatons were even more grotesque and nightmarish in their design. Some were fused directly into the very fabric of the machinery, their metallic bodies becoming horrifying extensions of the grinding gears and turning shafts. Others scuttled along the moving platforms with terrifying speed and agility, their multi-jointed limbs resembling those of metallic spiders, their movements erratic and unnervingly fast. Their crimson eyes followed his every move, promising a swift and brutal end. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the incessant mechanical din, a sound that sent a sliver of desperate hope piercing through the crushing weight of despair. It was a scream, raw and filled with unimaginable terror. It was human. Faint at first, almost swallowed by the mechanical cacophony, it grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the vast chamber. Someone else was still alive in this mechanical hell, enduring the same horrors. Driven by this fragile spark of hope, Valerius pressed deeper into the treacherous cog labyrinth, following the haunting sound of the screams. The mechanical din intensified, the shifting platforms making navigation even more perilous. He had to be constantly vigilant, lest he be crushed by the massive, grinding teeth of the machinery that surrounded him. The screams grew closer, more desperate, urging him onward through the mechanical maze. He rounded a massive, slowly turning gear and saw it. A figure was strapped to a rotating platform, its limbs stretched taut, slowly being fed into a monstrous set of interlocking cogwheels that whirred and ground with sickening anticipation. The figure was barely recognizable as human, its body already mangled and torn by the relentless machinery. The screams were coming from it, weak and fading, each one a testament to unimaginable agony. Several of the clockwork automatons stood around the platform, their crimson eyes fixed on the dying figure with a cold, detached indifference. They seemed to be observing, almost savoring, the slow and brutal torment. Their mechanical limbs twitched occasionally, as if in anticipation of the final, gruesome act. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage boiled within Valerius, eclipsing his fear and exhaustion. He raised his last pistol, his remaining shots precious, and unleashed a furious volley of fire at the automatons guarding the platform. The crimson beams tore through their metallic bodies, sending sparks and oily fluids flying. The automatons turned their attention to him, their crimson eyes burning with renewed malice. He had dared to interrupt their horrifying spectacle. Chapter 6, The Blood Boiler's Embrace. The automatons, their mechanical composure shattered by Valerius's attack, turned on him with swift and brutal efficiency. He fought them off with his remaining last pistol shots and the heavy piece of metal he wielded, his movements fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline. But he knew he was outnumbered, his every swing a testament to his dwindling strength. He had to reach the dying figure on the platform, to somehow alleviate their suffering or, failing that, end it quickly. He charged forward, a lone figure of defiance amidst the relentless mechanical onslaught, dodging the flashing blade limbs of the automatons, his boots slipping on the treacherous, oil-slicked metal floor. He reached the rotating platform and saw the horrifying extent of the woman's injuries. Her Imperial Guard uniform was ripped to shreds, soaked with blood. Her eyes, wide with unimaginable terror, flickered in and out of focus, her body broken and mangled by the relentless machinery. "Hold on!" Valerius yelled, his voice raw with desperation, frantically trying to find a way to release her from the platform's deadly embrace. But the mechanisms were intricate and heavily secured, designed for a far more sinister purpose than simple industrial function. The automatons were closing in, their blade limbs raised, their crimson eyes promising a swift and agonizing death. He wouldn't have much time. Suddenly, a section of the wall slid open with a groaning of metal, revealing a fiery inferno. The heat that washed over Valerius was intense, the air shimmering with the oppressive heat haze. It was a massive furnace, its roaring flames casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the chamber, illuminating the horrifying scene in a hellish glow. The stench of burning promethium and something else, something akin to burnt flesh, filled the air. An idea, desperate and utterly insane, sparked in Valerius's mind. He turned to the dying woman, his face grim. "I'm going to try something. It's going to hurt. A lot." Before she could even register his words, he grabbed her mangled body and, with a surge of adrenaline born of pure desperation, hauled her off the rotating platform just as it completed another cycle, the massive cogwheels grinding with sickening finality where she had been moments before. The automatons, their attention now fully focused on him, turned their crimson eyes upon him, burning with a furious, mechanical rage. He had denied them their gruesome prize. They advanced, their movements relentless and purposeful. Valerius, cradling the broken woman in his arms, stumbled towards the open furnace door. The heat radiating from the inferno was almost unbearable, searing his exposed skin, but it was their only chance, a desperate gamble against certain death. "Get inside," he yelled over the roar of the flames, shoving her gently but firmly towards the fiery opening. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. "No. It's too hot." Her voice was a weak, barely audible whisper. "It's better than what they'll do to you," he roared, pushing her further, urging her towards the relative safety within the furnace chamber. As she stumbled into the fiery embrace, Valerius turned to face the advancing automatons, the last defender of a dying soul. He raised his empty las pistol, a futile gesture of defiance, and then, with a final act of desperate ingenuity, he grabbed a nearby fuel line, thick and pulsing with flammable liquid, and ripped it open. A torrent of volatile promethium sprayed across the chamber, engulfing the advancing automatons in a shimmering, deadly mist. He then hurled a burning piece of debris from the furnace into the fuel-soaked air, and the entire chamber erupted in a massive, deafening explosion. Flames engulfed the automatons, their metallic bodies melting and twisting in the searing inferno. The heat washed over Valerius, scorching his skin and singeing his hair, but he stood his ground, his eyes fixed on the burning horrors as their mechanical shrieks echoed through the chamber. When the flames finally began to subside, the chamber was a smoldering ruin, littered with the molten and twisted remains of the clockwork abominations. Valerius collapsed to his knees, his body battered and burned, his lungs aching with the acrid smoke, but alive. He had survived the blood boiler's embrace, but the cost had been horrific. Chapter 7, The Cogsmith's Iron Requiem. Valerius crawled through the smoldering wreckage of the furnace chamber, his body a symphony of agony with every movement. He found the woman huddled in a relatively untouched corner, shielded from the worst of the blast, miraculously alive, though her body was covered in severe burns. Her breathing was shallow and ragged. We need to get out of here," he croaked, his voice hoarse and barely audible above the crackling embers. He managed to help her to her feet, and they stumbled through the ruined factory, the oppressive silence now broken only by the snap and hiss of residual flames and their own ragged, pain-filled breaths. They moved deeper into the complex, driven by a primal instinct to escape this mechanical hell, hoping to find a way out or, at the very least, a defensible position where they could tend to their grievous wounds. Their desperate flight eventually led them to a vast control room, a bewildering array of flickering monitors displaying indecipherable data streams, intricate control panels covered in arcane symbols and levers, and humming machinery that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. In the very center of the room stood a massive, ornate cogwheel, far larger and more intricate than any they had seen before. It rotated slowly, emitting a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that resonated deep within Valerius's bones. A palpable aura of dark power emanated from it. Behind this central cogwheel stood a figure. It was unnaturally tall and gaunt, clad in oil-stained, rust-colored robes that seemed to writhe with unseen mechanisms beneath their fabric. Its face was completely obscured by a grotesque mask constructed of interlocking gears and polished metal plates. A network of thin wires and flexible tubes snaked from the mask, disappearing into the humming machinery that surrounded it, as if the figure was physically connected to the very heart of the factory. This had to be the cogsmith, the architect of this mechanical nightmare, the twisted genius behind the clockwork horrors. The masked figure turned slowly, its hidden eyes seeming to fix directly on them, piercing through the gloom of the control room. A chilling, mechanical voice, synthesized and utterly devoid of emotion, emanated from the intricate mask. "Intruders. Your presence disrupts the symphony. You have interfered with my grand design." From the shadows that clung to the edges of the control room, more of the clockwork automatons emerged, their crimson eyes glowing with renewed intensity. They moved with a silent, purposeful menace, surrounding Valerius and the injured woman, their blade limbs and crushing claws raised in anticipation. "What have you done here?" Valerius demanded, his voice weak but laced with a defiant anger. "What are these things? These abominations?" The masked figure tilted its head, a dry, grating chuckle echoing from within the mask. "These are the future, guardsmen. Perfection incarnate. Flesh is weak, brittle, and ultimately fleeting. But metal endures. I have transcended the limitations of your fragile mortality, forged a new form of life from the very gears and essence of this world. This is heresy." Valerius spat, his bloodied fist clenching. Unforgivable abomination. Heresy, the cogsmith echoed, its mechanical voice laced with a hint of something akin to amusement. Or evolution, guardsman. You cling to your decaying flesh, your ephemeral existence. I offer transcendence, a glorious union with the immutable machine. It gestured with a long, spindly metallic finger towards the massive cogwheel behind it. This is the Iron Psalm of Perdition. It takes the base elements of this world, the unyielding metal, the life-giving oil, even the vital essence of those I deem suitable for integration, and transforms them into my magnificent children. A wave of nausea, more profound than any physical pain, washed over Valerius. He understood now the true horror of Xylos. The metallic tang in the air, the mangled remains, the pervasive sense of suffering. This entire factory was not just a place of industry, but a grotesque engine of transformation, fueled by death, despair, and the desecration of life itself. You're insane, the woman whispered, her voice trembling with shock and horror. The cogsmith seemed to disregard her completely. You will join them, guardsmen. Your flawed flesh will be reforged, your insignificant spirit integrated into the unified machine consciousness. You will become a harmonious component of the perfection. The automatons advanced, their movements slow but utterly relentless. Valerius knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was the end. He was wounded beyond measure, utterly exhausted, and his weapons were useless. But he would not break. He would not yield to this mechanical madman. He would meet his end with defiance in his heart. Chapter 8, Entropy's Unending Hymn. Valerius roared a final, defiant cry, a raw sound of human resistance against the encroaching mechanical doom, and charged towards the cogsmith, drawing his bloodied and battered combat knife. The automatons moved to intercept him, their blade limbs flashing in the dim light, but his desperate lunge caught them by surprise. He dodged and weaved through their clumsy attempts to restrain him, his movements fueled by a final surge of adrenaline and a burning refusal to become another cog in this madman's machine. He reached the central cogwheel, the pulsating heart of the factory's malevolent energy. The cogsmith stood before it, its masked face impassive, radiating an aura of cold, mechanical superiority. Foolish, insignificant mortal, the synthesized voice hissed from behind the metal mask. You cannot possibly comprehend the power you defy. Your resistance is but a fleeting spark against the eternal flame of the machine. The cogsmith raised a long, spindly metallic hand, and bolts of crackling, black energy arced from its fingertips, striking Valerius with brutal force. He cried out in agony, his body convulsing under the unholy assault, but he pressed on, driven by a primal need to end this nightmare. He lunged at the cogsmith, his combat knife aimed with desperate precision at the masked face, the source of that chilling, mechanical voice. But the cogsmith was faster, its movements fluid and unnatural despite its mechanical augmentations. A wickedly sharp mechanical tentacle, previously concealed beneath its rust-colored robes, lashed out with lightning speed, wrapping around Valerius's arm, its metallic grip crushing bone and tearing flesh. Valerius screamed, the pain searing through his battered body, and dropped his knife. The cogsmith drew him closer, its masked face inches from his own. The air around it crackled with dark energy. Your struggle is meaningless, it hissed, its mechanical voice a chilling whisper. You will become one with the machine. Your individuality will be optimized. Suddenly, the injured woman, her face contorted with a mixture of pain and furious resolve, lunged forward with a desperate, guttural cry. Ignoring her own grievous injuries, she grabbed a heavy, oil-stained wrench from a nearby workbench and brought it down with all her remaining strength on the cogsmith's masked head. The impact shattered the intricate metal mask, sending fragments of gears and polished plates clattering across the metal floor. Beneath the shattered mask, a horrifying visage was revealed, a gaunt, decaying human face, hideously fused with metal and a grotesque network of wires and tubes. Its eyes, burning with a fanatical, unholy light, widened in shock and pain. Sparks and oily fluids sputtered from the broken mask, and the cogsmith staggered back, a high-pitched, mechanical shriek of agony escaping its lips. The connection to the central cogwheel seemed to falter. The pulsating energy that emanated from it flickered erratically, and the humming machinery throughout the control room sputtered and slowed. The automatons surrounding them stuttered in their movements, their crimson eyes dimming momentarily. Seizing the fleeting opportunity, ignoring the searing pain in his crushed arm, Valerius ripped the mechanical tentacle free. He grabbed the fallen wrench from the floor and brought it down again and again on the cogsmith's exposed head, the sickening crunch of bone and metal echoing through the suddenly quieter control room. With each brutal blow, the cogsmith's fanatical light dimmed, its mechanical shrieks growing weaker. With a final, desperate heave, Valerius brought the wrench down one last time. The cogsmith collapsed to the floor in a heap of robes and broken machinery, its mechanical limbs twitching erratically before finally going still. The pulsing energy from the central cogwheel died completely, and the humming machinery fell silent. The automatons that had surrounded them froze in place, their crimson eyes fading to dull, lifeless embers. The Iron Psalm of Perdition had fallen silent. The mechanical symphony of suffering had finally reached its discordant end. Valerius and the woman, battered, burned, and bleeding, stood amidst the deactivated horrors, the sudden silence deafening after the relentless mechanical cacophony. They had survived the nightmare of Xylos, but the horrors they had witnessed, the sheer scale of the mechanical madness, would forever be etched into the deepest recesses of their minds, a haunting testament to the darkness they had faced. They were alone, on a dead world, surrounded by the silent remnants of a terrifying heresy. Their immediate ordeal was over, but the invisible scars of Xylos, the echoes of grinding gears and dying screams, would undoubtedly remain, an unending hymn of entropy in their souls. The end.